Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Assemblyman Dan Stec. My name is Nicole Weatherwax. I am a nurse at Glensaw's Hospital, and I'm also going to school for my bachelor's
Okay, great.
at SUNY Plattsburgh.
Yep.
I'm here today to talk to you about Assembly Bill A01532. It's to support nurses and their fight to provide quality care and safe quality setting. There are staffing issues globally, not only in New York State. And some of it is not under complete control. We need more education and more nurses.
Yep.
What we can provide is nursing staffing if it's available. I'm a constituent, and my goal here is today to present this to you, hopefully gain your support and help nurses out. So the short staffing epidemic. Nurse to patient ratios are often 1 to 5, sometimes 1 to 9. 1 to 4 ratio is the evidence-based practice quality care ratio. As a patient, you, your family, you want and deserve quality care. Patients are at risk for injury and also staffing. So the proposed law, have you had a chance to look over it at all? Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with the bill.
Okay.
We voted on it in the past, and it's still not law, and I imagine that we'll have a chance to debate and vote on it again in the future. I'm not sure if it'll be amended from year to year much, but the bill's been around for a while.
Okay. Basically, it's to mandate set nurse-to-patient ratios to protect New York State patients. This is how it would work. The nurse assignments are a ratio-based specific, unit and patient-specific. What are the patient's needs?
You'll need more staff per patient for something like an emergency room or something that's more acute care as opposed to geriatric or something where that's more stable. So right, so that's why there'd be different ratios.
Yep. Yeah. Staffing for acuity. I'm not sure if you've heard of the acuity. It rates the amount of patient care that it's expected and the staffing that's on, and it sets up a number, but you could take less depending on the patient outcomes and the condition of the patient. Assisted personnel, that's not supposed to be included. Technicians, you have housekeeping, all that stuff supports the nurse in doing the best job that he or she can. Public disclosure, hospitals are supposed to report that to the public. No averaging. What that means is when you do the staffing by acuity, the averaging would say 5 point whatever to the one nurse. It's a set ratio, no more. You can go less if need be, but no more. Floats are staffing that float around the hospital. They have to be trained in that specific area. Sure. And they also have to have an orientation to that area.
Sure. They have to be able to perform there.
Nurse-to-patient ratio. This is trauma emergency 1-to-1, operating room 1-to-1, intensive care is 1-to-1, emergency critical care, post-anesthesia care. Then you have the labor and delivery 1-to-2, 1-to-1, 1-to-3, 1-to-4, depending on the stage of delivery. It's all based on evidence-based practice, and they've done extensive research on it. Then you've got emergency department and step-down telemetry. That's basically what I do on 3 West. Is 1-to-3. Now, I had 6 patients last night, so I work 7P to 7A overnight. So a lot of people sleeping, but then we also do have geriatric patients who have dementia.
Right.
They get sundowners. That's when they actually are up at night.
Okay.
And it's a safety issue. We have to have sitters and things like that to keep them safe. So pediatrics 1-to-3. Med surg is 1-to-4, and acute care psychiatric is 1-to-4. And then rehabilitation, subacute, that's 1-to-5. The number of patients assigned to a nurse, it's common sense. It has direct impact on the quality of care you can provide to your patient. The research is extensive. There is proven 5 additional deaths per 1,000 patients in hospitals, which staff up to 1-to-8 ratio compared to those to 1-to-4. And this is all stemming from the California you said your sister works in California?
Sacramento area.
Yeah. The odds of a patient death is also increased by 7% for each additional patient that you must care for. California was the first state to mandate safe staffing ratios in 2004, and it's proven that fewer negative outcomes for patients and staff have been reported. Staffing levels proved to save lives, and the quality of care is improved and shorter stays. So people are not being readmitted. Hospitals have lower turnover rates, have higher rates. Pneumonia, shock, cardiac arrest. They have urinary tract infections, gastrointestinal bleeds, higher costs, and sometimes mortality, which is unfortunate. With that being said, hospital-acquired complications are preventable. Up to 17.3% increased cost if a patient was to acquire, say, hospital-acquired pneumonia, hospital-acquired urinary tract infection, raises their cost to stay. And there is a law that if a patient does acquire a hospital-acquired infection or injury, say pressure ulcer, Medicare does not reimburse that. So it's detrimental to the hospital. Some people were saying that the hospital may lose money in California. They have proven that to not be the case, and actually they gained. From 1994 to 2003, they grossed $12.5 billion, and from 2004 to 2010 is $20.6 billion. California managers have said that it's actually easier to secure funding with the mandated staffing. So the nursing workforce costs may rise, but it's also going to improve patient outcomes and avoided adverse events balance out that cost. Safe nurse staffing levels have positive impact on facility processes and resident outcomes. As nurse turnover increases, quality of resident care declines and results in more frequent uses of restraints, urinary catheterizations, psychoactive drugs. Also, when patients' families come in, they give you poor reports. You have patients coming into the hospitals with pressure injuries because they're not being turned and positioned, because they don't have the staff. I recently was talking to a tech that works at the hospital with me, but she also works for a local nursing home, and she's saying that sometimes she has 40 patients to herself. You put restraints on somebody, you're supposed to check on them every half an hour, but if you're short-staffed, say in a nursing home, they could develop contractures where they can't move their arms anymore, their muscles get stiff. It's just a poor outcome. In overall, we've proved that safe staffing saves lives, it increases patient satisfaction, it reduces caregiver burnout and turnover, but it also saves facilities money in the long run. Obviously, there's ups and downs to supporting the bill, and kinks would have to be worked out, but I think from a nurse working in the field that improve quality care for patients.
The California study, if I was going to give it advice or whatever about, all right, your goal is to get this into law, across the finish line, and I'm familiar with that process and what goes into certainly my thinking on how I would vote on the bill. If the California study shows that, hey, this is actually, because one of the challenges we have, I think it's probably everywhere in the country, but I'll be specific to New York and super specific to the North Country and rural hospitals, that the burden or the level of difficulty it is for a small rural hospital in the North Country to achieve this, as opposed to a big hospital that has economies of scale and large numbers in the country, because the size of the staffs are small and the number of patients are small, that those are very different. So I'm more familiar with the North Country hospitals and talking to management. The nurse, I think everyone would agree, hey, there will be less crime if there are more cops on the street. So comes a cost issue. And certainly, in addition to nursing staff and representatives coming in and lobbying on this subject, we also have hospital administrators coming in, and again, they're on two sides of now what's a financial discussion. Should that be what it's about? Well, right or wrong, that's part of what it's about. I think everybody, both the nurse and the administrator, wants their loved one to have the best care, and I think everyone would even agree, you know what, and generally that usually means more staff is better. So I don't think there's an argument about that part of the proposal. The concerns, I think, center around the hospitals that I represent, that many of them are losing money. So this eventually can morph into, does the hospital stay in business? Do we lose that provider? Does somebody that's now already going 20 miles to a hospital now have to drive 100 miles to the hospital? So those are their concerns. I'm not shutting the door and saying I don't think that there's a winning argument here. I'm saying you're the expert, you know more about this than I do. The California study, I think, I've heard a couple people point to it and say, hey, this shows mandating these ratios actually will give better outcomes, which will save you more money than it costs you. Go back to how I started by saying the advice that I would give you is, don't just try to convince me and my colleagues. I mean, that's eventually but you make it easier for us if you convince the people that we're hearing on the other ear, the administrators. If you show them, if you convince them, hey, we hear you're trying to run a hospital or a nursing home, and we hear that you're concerned about this is going to be a burden that is going to finish you. But if you can convince them, hey, we are going to improve patient outcomes, and it's not going to cost us money, it's going to save us money, and you can show them that data and convince them, and they stop coming into us and saying, we hate this bill is going to close this hospital. What they're saying is that we are struggling to make ends meet now, and this will be very expensive. And again, if it's your son or daughter, your mom or dad, my mom or dad, I'm not worried about that cost. I want mom and dad are taken care of. We have to make sure that the long term, that the system works for everybody, that survives. And so, I mean, I have no doubt that more staffing will give you better results. It's always is the improved performance justify the added cost on the system? And again, it's, there'll be people that'll say, I can't believe that we're talking about dollars and cents when it comes to patient care. Guess what? We are talking about dollars and cents when it comes to patient care. That's what the whole fight in Washington, D.C. for the last 10 years has been around. Well, it's a reality. I mean, it's irresponsible to say, it costs what it costs, just write the check. The world doesn't work like that. I have no doubt that there's studies that say this is the right ratio, this is the sweet spot for the ratio, give or take. But I get cautious about thrusting that mandate on a hospital when the hospital administrators are saying, this is an unnecessary burden. We know what we're doing. We're managing it, and every hospital's different. But there's always that one horror story. And again, if it's your family that's caught in that horror story, you're angry, you're upset, and this system, the status quo, isn't working for you, and I respect that. So I'm not advocating for the status quo, but before we leap to something different, we need to make sure that we've got more certainty. The easiest way to convince the legislature, this has been voted on in the Assembly. It's passed the Assembly. I voted against it in the Assembly. I don't think it's been for a floor vote of the Senate. That may very well change in November if the Senate changes. I mean, now we're talking money. Now we're pivoting to politics. The politics of Albany could easily be that in January there's a different Senate, and this gets voted on and signed into law, and then I hope that the California study's right and that it works out. I always like to see a more consensus-driven outcome anyway. So whether there's a Republican-controlled Senate or a Democrat-controlled Senate, convince the senators and convince the Assembly members, more of us, that hey, this is the right thing to do, and this isn't going to break the bank. And I think a good way to do that is to try to convince those administrators. When we had the minimum wage debates in New York, the market and the sheer volume of New York City made that change a lot easier to absorb than the same change. Hey, we're the same state, so whatever the law is, it should be everywhere. And in the case of minimum wage, it wasn't. They actually had a tiered approach where they did treat New York City differently than they did upstate. But by and large, when you start making that change for rural versus urban, they are different, and it will have a greater burden to a smaller organization. And I think the concern of a lot of upstate legislators, certainly rural legislators, they're worried about, hey, what is this going to do to my small local hospital? And again, I know for a fact that a lot of them, they're not making a lot of money. There's a lot of them that are losing money. And then, of course, well, how do we fix that? Well, we fix Medicaid reimbursement. Well, and then you start looking at the federal government has a $20 trillion deficit. The spending priorities there. Should we be building up the military? What are we going to do? Should we be doing something with the border? And oh, by the way, what about our healthcare system? You're going to take money from one to give it to another. So, Medicaid rates have not been looked at or increased in New York State in a long time, and that would help the numbers work better. But I don't see those changes coming quickly, anytime soon. So I think we need to assume that we've still got the same, revenue sources that we do here. So those are my concerns. You may never convince them that they'll save money, but if you can convince them that it's not going to bankrupt them,
right,
you'd go a long way. I don't think anyone would argue that a better ratio is better for patient outcome. The question becomes, sadly, but quite candidly, quite frankly, affordability to the system. I want to make sure that we don't do something where all of a sudden a community in the North Country that had a hospital loses their hospital. And that, it shouldn't all fall on the feet of the staffing ratio, but I don't want this to become the straw that breaks the camel's back for a local hospital or a nursing home. Right. So I don't have a answer, sadly, to say this is what we should do. Let's let somebody else try. Yeah, there's a time to lead, but if California's already taken this step, and they did in 2004, right, so now we got 10, 14 years worth of data. What did it do? Let the administrators tear through it, because they'll know what to look at better than I would. They'll say, this is what they're looking at. And if they tear into that report and they're like, all right, maybe this isn't the end of the world, then they start talking to their similar association in California. All right, let's, and they realize this is workable. Then they start telling the legislature, we can live with this. But at this point, they're all adamantly, this is not the local, the North Country, the small ones. They're generally, this is really bad for us. This is going to hurt us, and I know that they're fighting to survive. Yeah. And so I suspect that the Long Island, New York City, the big hospitals, this is less of a burden for them because they're probably, by average, they're probably already similar. They're close. They're in the ballpark anyways. Mm-hmm. But if you mandated this on a small hospital, that might be really difficult on them.
I will touch on that and say that actually Glens Falls Hospital has been working on the whole staffing issue.
Good. Well, they're open to it then. Good.
They do recognize that this is, a good thing. Yeah. Whether they want it mandated, that's a separate issue.
Everyone wants more flexibility. I know what the right ratio is, but don't hold my feet to the fire. Well, or they want to be able to say, we didn't make it that day. We don't, we couldn't get there that week or that day. We don't want a penalty. We don't want somebody coming in and assessing fines. And there's times where giving somebody or an industry or flexibility makes sense. Mm-hmm. Especially when it's working. Now, but you get a couple of instances where you start bringing data and saying, hey, guess what? This is what's happening in these hospitals. And oh, by the way, these hospitals had this ratio, but these other hospitals that didn't have this problem, their ratios were here. And this was the cost that, not having the ratio, this saved them money here, but this was the added cost. You start being able to group two different experiences of hospitals in New York, ones that are voluntarily achieving this and others that are not, and they're not close to it. And you start saying, hey, they are having worse outcomes. And oh, by the way, they saved, $500,000 on staffing, but it cost them $2 million on added costs for liability or bad outcomes or additional procedures or longer stays or whatever those, then you could say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think that's at the heart of what you're talking about in the study is that, hey, this is preventative, and yes, there's a cost with it, but we're telling you we're going to avoid a bigger cost.
Say if you get sick,
Mhm.
you're gonna go to Gonzales, you're gonna go to Saratoga, or you're gonna go all
I'm gonna go wherever the doctor tells me to,
So
go.
what I'm saying
Yeah,
to you,
yeah.
if we have negative
Depends on what it is,
if
right?
we have
Yeah,
negative
yeah.
outcomes, appropriate
Yeah.
care. If we have negative outcomes,
Oh,
you
sure.
get that bad rep. People don't want to come.
Right.
You go to certain places.
Right. And actually though,
if you're doing better,
right, so that competition or that capitalism part of the supply and demand, hey, if a hospital is getting it right and they're way off the ratios, but whatever they're doing, everybody that goes there has a wonderful experience. Right. People are going to go there. Similarly, if they're not doing a good job and it has to do with, or they figure out, oh, maybe it's because our ratios aren't where they should be, and now we're losing revenue and patients because they're not coming here, then the supply and demand, they're going to be forced to look at the ratios.